clinging, the five aggregates of clinging. And I'd like to just use a more contemporary language and maybe call it the 5 parts of being a human being, or 5 components of being a human being from the Buddhist teaching perspective. And what I'd like to do in the meditation, because we'll build on these in the talk, is just simply have you recognize them in your own experience. And it turns out that just beginning to recognize these 5 parts of experience is the first step in this teaching and this practice, because it's these parts of our experience that we tend to identify with, we tend to get caught up in, we tend to take as ourselves. So with that as the background, I just invite you now to just begin arriving into your posture. Settling the body and settling into the body. You might like to take some moments to take a few full deep breaths. And perhaps to gently notice if there are any places in the body that are holding or tense, and just invite them to soften. And to begin, I'd like to guide your attention to the first part of experience, what's called form, but it's really the body, the whole body. And you might just start to feel and sense the whole body sitting here. If you can't see the body, and if you don't think about your concepts of your body, how do you know there's a body here? Perhaps there's familiar aches and tensions. All kinds of different physical sensations. And there's the 5 senses that are receiving information all the time. hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, tasting. And there's breathing. So the body is this first part of our experience. And as you're attentive and interested in what your body feels like, you might choose one or two places, maybe the chest or the belly, one hand, and just begin to be curious about the feeling tone. As you place your attention in this one area, does it feel pleasant, unpleasant? Neither. And whatever's being felt, receiving it in a soft, caring way. And as you continue to sit, you might begin to be aware of the third part of experience, what's called perceptions in Buddhist teachings. And these are all the ways that we categorize, label, identify what something is. A body is a perception, it's a concept. It's referring to something. Breathing, hearing, table, chair. These are perceptions. They have a lot to do with memory, the way we've been taught to perceive things. And perhaps it's already been happening, that your mind is wandering off into mental activity. This includes all kinds of thinking processes, emotions, images. This is where the personality, what your own personality and your history is centered. This is also the place where clinging, aversion, desire, and the wholesome states arise. Kindness, generosity, wisdom. Mental activity also includes emotions. You might notice if there's any emotions right now. And you might also now recognize something that stays in the background, and that's consciousness or awareness itself, the knowing of the body, the knowing of physical sensations, the knowing of sounds and emotions. So I'd like to invite you right now to just rest back, commit to being fully present in a relaxed, interested way. And whenever you notice one of these aspects of experience, just make a little note. Physical sensations, pleasant, sounds, anxiety, peace. Just try that on your own in silence. No need to rush, just note slowly, carefully. Distracted, moving. And as you softly note all these different kinds of experiences, can you notice that they change? Maybe slowly. Sometimes they get bigger, sometimes they fade away. You might find that you want to rest on the breath. You can just note in and out. And as you notice the body through physical sensations and sensory sensations, you notice feeling tones and perceptions and mental thoughts. Can you also notice if the mind is liking or disliking anything that's arising, pushing it away or holding on to it, judging it. Just resting here, noticing these 5 parts of experience, letting them be, giving them space, but fully present, just letting them flow. In some ways, as you're aware like this, you might realize you're abiding as awareness, as that which knows what's happening, moment to moment. As we begin to close, you might take a moment to notice again in an intentional way these parts of your experience, the body, feeling tones, simple perceptions, labels. The presence and absence of emotions and mental activities. And the knowing presence of that which is aware. And as we practice today, as we meditate, we listen to the Dharma. May it be of benefit to yourself in freeing your own heart and mind and helping you live more with peace and compassion. And may it benefit all those who come in contact with you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And so I just invite you to relax back and be comfortable. And I'll share some reflections. I'd like to mention a little bit of my personal experience with this topic of taking things personally and non-self and not self. That's going to be a big theme, not self. And just to say a little bit about my own experiences, that when I first started on the awakening path, I was very interested in what the I was and what is the I, what is the self. I did a lot of non-dual practices and went to a lot of retreats on that topic and subject and explored it very deeply. And then I sort of let it be and just kind of went back into deepening my understanding of the Buddhist teachings and practices, and hadn't come back to this for a while. But lately I've been redrawn to it again, and it kind of makes sense to me that I would circle back. And each time I come back to this topic of self, what it is, what it isn't, it feels like there's more insights, more integration, more open-mindedness. So this I would invite you, if this is a pretty new topic for you, just to take what works and know that it's a process. And if you're interested, you can start to find many resources about this topic. So again, the topic for today is taking things personally, and what is the self anyway? So I'm imagining, it certainly has been for me, that taking things personally is something that we've all experienced and we can still fall into. And for some of us, it might still be pretty alive. That happens more than maybe, it's associated with feeling more dukkha or distress than we would like or prefer. So just to first say that in some ways, it's such a perfect emotional experience, psychological and emotional experience, to explore the topic of not self. So let's just start kind of with, what is it like when you take things personally? What happens? I notice in my experience that I'm believing or assuming that someone else's mood or behavior or state or actions or inactions are maybe because of something I did or didn't do or could have done better, or that somehow they don't like me enough, or there's just something about me that's insufficient. So it could hit on any of these. I draw your attention to the key word there, assumes, right? And some common examples, let's just name some. Someone's short, abrupt, or impatient with you. How does that land? All of a sudden, you don't even know why, but a loved one or a close friend or somebody's in a bad mood and you just start kind of getting stirred up. Maybe plans change or you weren't invited to something. You might have even gotten some pretty neutral, pretty calm feedback and it felt like an attack. Maybe it's an email that was really important to you. You sent it to someone and there was a really big gap between the time you sent it and the time they responded. So this may not be the case, but when you look a little more closely in your own experience, what was the underlying interpretation? What was the sense of I or me? Was it mild, moderate, strong? What kind of thoughts start to arise? Something maybe like, this is my fault. I have to fix it. I should do something. It could be other things for you. But the mind and the body start to get churned up, spinning. There can be associated emotions like anxiety. Anxiety can start because we don't know, right? We're not certain what's going on, or we're afraid of it. We could feel insecure, we could feel concerned, we might feel angry and annoyed, offended. So just take a moment. What do you still tend to take personally? And what fear might be underneath there? See if you can recognize. And perhaps I'm just going to make some suggestions, and maybe there's this fear of disconnection that somehow you're going to be cut off from this person or this situation. You're going to lose connection. You're going to lose that contact somehow. Or maybe it's some kind of fear of not mattering or being important. So I just invite you to, as you move on from today and today's session, to just explore that and perhaps note when you're taking things personally and being curious about that. If we were going to put this into Dharma language, this taking things personally, we might frame it as, where and when do I contract around a sense of a fixed self? What sometimes we refer to as selfing. When does selfing arise for me? And I think taking things personally is, as I said earlier, is maybe one of the clearest expressions of selfing. Because they also start tapping into the historical me, your whole self-concept, your whole history. So if we were going to use maybe contemporary mindfulness-based psychologies, we would meet this moment of dukkha this painfulness, we would meet it, we would recognize it, we would allow it, we would feel it physically. We might recognize what beliefs were running through the mind. And this would all be skillful, and I recommend that you do this, because if you don't do this, you could be kind of skipping steps. You're not really connecting with your own conditioning and unwinding that. And we can meet this dukkha and take it one step further by exploring how it relates to the Buddhist teachings of not self. So I like to think of it as kind of a progression, right? So maybe we have this conventional reality where this happens and we don't even know what to do with it. Maybe we just do it the same way we've always done it. Then maybe we apply some, good Buddhist mindfulness psychology, and we start to understand it more and take care of it and have compassion for it. And to me, that would be another really skillful step. But then, if we want to, we could go even a step further. And that's explore what you feel and what's happening in terms of the not self teaching. So we'll switch to talking about that a little bit. This is something that is subtle, but I think immensely important. The Buddhist teachings, based on everything that I'm understanding, doesn't say that there isn't a self. It says, it points to what is not self. It doesn't deny that each of us has a mind, a body, a history, a unique personality. But it's saying that instead of assuming that you have a self, the not self teachings ask us to relax that assumption and start to investigate. Is this self that I think I am fixed, stable? Has it been the same my entire life? It's changing all the time, right? And we might assume that this self is autonomous and independent, rather than many processes that all human beings share. All these processes that shape who we are. So the teachings of not self, in my view, are pointing us to consider, to open to the possibility that there is no fixed permanent self inside of you. That there's all kinds of natural processes going on, but they don't mean there's a fixed self. That's kind of what it is. This is kind of what that teaching comes down to, is that it's constantly pointing to there's not a self inside of any of us that is constant, unchanging, and fixed. And I really have grown to appreciate that the Buddhist teachings, at least the Buddha, wasn't that interested, in my understanding, of metaphysical debates. Like, is there self, isn't there self, and what makes the world go round? He was interested in one key thing. And you know this from coming to Hugh's classes, right? He was interested in the Four Noble Truths. What causes suffering and how to alleviate it. And he was concerned with how clinging to a fixed identity creates suffering, and how that clinging, when it's seen, when it's acknowledged, when it's understood, and when you practice and cultivating all these other wholesome states that we practice, everything from mindfulness to samadhi to all the heart practices, we're actually encouraging or setting up the conditions for this mind to recognize that and to loosen up its identification. So let you take a deep breath and take that in so far. I think Joseph Goldstein says it really well. He writes, one of our deepest conditionings is the idea that there is a fixed, permanent, autonomous self to whom all experience is happening. I hope you noticed that in the meditation, rather than assuming you were noticing all that. Wasn't that just awareness noticing? Consciousness noticing? And there's two really other renowned teachers, Bhikkhu Bodhi, who says, we are empty of a permanent, unchanging, independent self. He's a long time practitioner, a bhikkhu, and he's a scholar in the Buddhist teachings that greatly admired. And many of us know the teacher of Ajahn Chah. He said, there is nothing in our experience stable enough to be a self. I love this one because this is pointing us back to impermanence and inconstancy. We know if we pay attention, the more we meditate, the more we observe everyday experiences, that everything is inconstant, changing and fluxing. And the Buddhist teachings said, why assume there's a self in there that doesn't go through the same process? So the invitation is not to get all caught up in, the intellectual understanding, although I think it is really helpful. A lot of what becomes insight starts with some knowledge, with some new frame of a new way of thinking about something. But it isn't a belief to adopt, and it's really more of an invitation, especially when there's dukkha or contraction, because that's when you can really begin to be present and explore whether there's a self there making it all happen, a permanent one. So I'm going to just bring this back to kind of every day, and how is it? I started thinking about that. How is it that the belief in a self is learned and reinforced? I mean, what? And, we can read books about that. We can go to psychology and neuroscience, but I've had the opportunity in the last 2 years to live next door to my granddaughter, and I've gotten to watch every stage from the time she was born until now she's talking. And that's been of great interest to me, not only because she's, wonderful and I enjoy it so much, but it's also because, wow, all these things that I've studied and looked at and pondered on, and here she is, I'm getting to just watch it in real time. So, when she was first born, I was just noticing, these are just observations. She had a body, her 5 senses were there. She kind of knew basic pleasant, unpleasant, right? She could cry if she needed something or if she was distressed. Her consciousness was there. She might not had a name for anything that was happening or thoughts about anything, any conceptuality, but she knew pain, pleasure, right? She had some knowing presence, right? But what she didn't have was any concept of me or I. I was laughing and realizing how long it took us to just teach her that she was June, right? We'd say, "You're June," and she'd be like, "Huh?" And you can see we are socialized it. We're taught this, and that's you. This is me. That's right. And so I got to watch this firsthand, and it really brought it home. Like, it wasn't conceptual anymore. I was like, aha, wow, okay, there it is, right? Now, you might hear this and think, well, gosh, don't we need to do that? Yes, we need to do that. We need to help our children go through all the developmental processes of being a human, right? So this teaching, again, is not suggest that we don't tend to developmental things, but it does kind of say to us, okay, go through the conventional world, do everything you do, but can you have dual vision here, dual perspective, and also realize that even though the world and everybody you encounter is going to see you as this self, and you can sometimes see you as this self, that there's also that you're really this living, active, dynamic process, that all these different processes are coming together, and that there's a whole lot of it that's outside of your control, most of it, right? A whole lot of it. So I don't want to go down this road very, very much, but just to name that, and some of you may be reading some of this literature, but that some neuroscientists, a lot of the scientists have suggested that the left part of our brain just brings together, it's this process of sensations, memories, emotions, habits, preferences, and it just blends them all together and creates this narrative. My story, me, I. And it's this narrative self that we often mistake for who we are. And it gets claimed as me and mine. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, you can explore it. So I'd like to take us back now to the Buddhist framework regarding not self. And this is where the teachings on the five aggregates, the 5 parts of experience that we did during meditation, becomes very central to this path. I think I read there's something like 159 discourses. That might be an exaggeration, but a whole lot of discourses that deal with 5 aggregates, because they were seen as the actual mechanism, the actual processes that we identify with and that we cling to, that either we have a lot of aversion to or we have a lot of attraction to. And think of the body. I mean, if the body feels good, aren't you like all about it? And then when the body doesn't feel so good, right? Oh, some aversion kicks in, right? So again, and just to refresh your memory from the meditation, as the Buddhist framework is that these 5 components of experience, the body, which is form, feelings, feeling tones, basic simple perception, all kinds of mental activities, that's a huge part of it, right? Because that's where I making and me making takes place, in the mental realm, right? And the Buddhist teachings also teach that these aggregates come together to create a sense of view moment by moment, right? And a lot of that process, you're not aware of that, right? It's not like you can reach back and know which thoughts are going to come through your mind, or it's not like you see them way, way back there getting ready to bubble into consciousness, right? So these processes are, a lot of them are happening behind what we might call conscious experience. This might take it in, might help a little bit more too. This is something, I don't know if you get the Tricycle magazine, but it was in the January issue, and it's just a brief statement, again by Joseph Goldstein. He said, it's important to make thoughts the object of mindfulness. I would say thinking, right? Thinking processes, the object of mindfulness. If we remain unaware of thinking, of thoughts as they arise, it's difficult to develop insight into their impersonal nature and into our own deep-rooted and subtle identification with the thinking process. This identification reinforces the illusion of a separate permanent self, of someone who is thinking. So the shift in perspective is, rather than I am thinking, it's thinking is happening, or the mind is thinking, or the thinking process is occurring. I remember it was such a game changer, light bulb moment for me. It was probably in the 90s, maybe it was the early 2000s. And the book came out with the title, Thoughts Without a Thinker. And it was pointing to that we assume that we're the thinker, that's, again, this assumption is huge here. It's an unquestioned assumption. I'm the thinker. And it plays out all the time. These are my thoughts. Now, they may have come from your experience, but when and how they arise, there's a lot of unconscious process going on there. One sutta that I did want to mention, and it's called the Discourse on the Not-Self Characteristics. And this is an important discourse if you like to read the discourses, but it says that this is kind of how the Buddha languaged it when he thought about each part of experience or each aggregate. He just was very simple and clear. The body is not self. Feeling is not self. Perception is not self. Mental formations are not self, which means mental activity and emotions. Consciousness is not self. And then there's another sutta where he says, he doesn't say that there's no self. He just says, these things are not self. These things that because this is the kind of insight. If they were self, are they really fit to be self? I mean, if there was this all-powerful self inside of your mind, wouldn't it command your body to be a certain way? If those feelings were, if there was this self that was so powerful, so fit to be the self, would it make you suffer? Would it make you would it let you experience things that were unpleasant? If thoughts belonged to the self and the self was fit or had power, wouldn't it only choose nice and peaceful thoughts? Would we have so much greed, hatred, and delusion? So I love this actually because it's not, so when you hear, I hope you'll take this with you, when you hear out there, when you see no self, that's when everybody's mind goes, oh my gosh, this is, whoa, right? But this shift of not self, it's not saying what self is, or is or isn't, but it's saying these are not self. And you can find that out for yourself. Because you're not the controller of them. You may have to respond to them and work with them skillfully. So just going back for a minute before we start to close to when you feel this contraction of taking it personally, or I did something wrong, or it's my fault, or just the invitation would be, the practice in real life would be to really notice these 5 parts of experience and see which one is really predominant. And there might be 2 or 3. And see, like, if you're anxious, for example, you might have lots and lots of physical sensations, right? The mind might be doing a lot of what ifing and uncertainty, and the emotion might be doubt. So it's not like one just appears, but you kind of can start to see how it's the coming together of several things. And this is kind of what the 5 aggregate teaching is really trying to keep reinforcing, that there's no permanent fixed self, and that the human experience is one of many processes coming together. So I'm seeing Christine's on here and some others, but I must have been 4 years ago or something. We had this book group, and we did Rick Hanson's book called Dharma. Well, bless our hearts, because we went through like all 10 weeks of that. And it was pretty intense. I mean, it was like Buddhism and neuropsychology, but towards the end, he used a metaphor, and I kind of want to wrap up today using this metaphor, because I thought as time goes on, I really appreciate it. And it was called swirling eddies. Many of you have been maybe on rivers or creeks, or right? And an eddy are those kind of whirlpools you see in different places against rocks or trees that have fallen in, mostly like around rocks. And it looks like a solid thing, right? It looks like, oh, and then we might put that concept over it, right, eddy. But it's actually changing and shifting with the currents and with the conditions, and it's coming together just for a moment. If you were to come back to that river or creek, it would be gone, likely be gone the next time. And that's kind of how our moods and our stories about ourselves and our identities, and especially the moments when we're taking personally or we're experiencing dukkha, are kind of like that. Eddies in the stream, conditions coming together, all these parts of experience coming together. And if we cling to those eddies and call it me and mine, and it's my fault, and I'm responsible, and this is how I am, we kind of keep the wheels of dukkha spinning. When we might, this is an emotional mental eddy right now. If I kind of relax with it, be interested, allow it, let it be. Maybe I don't have to identify it so much as I and me and mine. So my wish for us, all of us, is that remain curious and open about this, and that we explore the not self perspective as another way of loosening the grip of clinging and grasping and suffering, stress. We might start to really like ourselves and others a lot better too. So let's just take a moment of silence and just sit with that for a few moments. Just noticing what's coming up, letting it be. What parts of experience are activated, present? So thank you for your attention and for listening.